Hi, this is Senator Malcolm Roberts for the Malcolm Roberts Show. Our aims are to restore our country and our planet for humans to abound and flourish. Thank you for having me as your guest in your car, your kitchen, your shed, your lounge room, your barbecue, wherever you are right now, sitting, standing, driving, walking, running, laying down. Who knows what you're doing? Exercising maybe, running. We've got a really special guest today, a wonderful guest, and we're going to start with something different because this guest has to maintain her anonymity. That's a mouthful, isn't it? Maintain her anonymity because of the topic we're covering. But before we go into that, I normally discuss the guest's background and what brought them to the point they're at. What we're going to do is go straight into that. But first, just a reminder, our show's two main themes are, first of all, freedom, and that's really being challenged with this what this guest has had to face. Freedom, specifically the freedom of replacing control, the eternal human struggle, control versus freedom. It's within each of us, it's between two of us, it's between nations, between groups. And the second thing is responsibility, specifically personal responsibility and integrity. History repeatedly shows and proves that both freedom and responsibility are essential for human progress and people's livelihoods. When we look beyond the few villains that try to exploit others, and those humans, they get the publicity. We see a wonderfully positive story with humanity. Humans are not the evil creatures they've been made out to be by certain people in our society and around the planet. I'm not suggesting we ignore the villains and the exploiters, nor the pain they wreak, yet look beyond them and look into them to understand the bigger picture in human evolution and progress. And humans have a very strong sense of love. And I want to introduce this guest. She has to maintain anonymity, as I said, because of the topic she's covering and her family sensitivities. But I want to introduce her as Claire's mum. Are you there, Claire's mum?
Yes, Senator. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. And thank you for showing the courage of being our guest. Could you read out your letter? Now, Claire's mum, she has two daughters, lovely
That's
daughters. And I'd like you to read out the letter you received recently from your youngest daughter.
Certainly.
With all of the the words she used.
The words she used. Hello, everybody. I'm delighted to be here. I suppose that's the wrong word. I'm actually panicking slightly. But I just want to assure you that I'm not the only person going through this. I want to assure you that this is happening to children all over Queensland, all over the country, all over the English-speaking world. Both my daughters have been captured by radical gender ideology. They've both been convinced that they're actually born in the wrong body and that they are actually men. And the only cure for this gender dysphoria is a gender transition. And that's a very nice way of saying puberty blockers, the same chemicals used by prisons to castrate sex offenders. And then it proceeds to cross-sex hormones, testosterone if you're a girl and estrogen if you're a boy, through to cosmetic surgery, removal of sexual organs.
That's mutilation, Claire's mum.
It is.
That's just, let's call it what it is. It's mutilation.
Absolutely mutilation. And you would probably all think, as I did, that there are safeguards on this process. There are none. Absolutely none. In fact, there is a conveyor belt of trans radical activists who have infiltrated the state departments of health, schooling, education, and social services. Now, my youngest daughter will read her letter, and I did raise her to use better language than she has in this letter, but it is her reconciliation with us after trying to declare herself as a mature minor at the behest of her school counsellor. And this mature minor status, which we'll get to, is the only safeguard on gender transition. The only
and the
safeguard.
reason, just to interrupt there, Claire's mum, the reason I asked Claire's mum to read this letter to start with is to give people hope and then to dive into the topic and also to show that the relationship between the daughter and the mother is quite strong and loving. And so there is a way out, there is a way through this. And this
Yes.
particular mother, Claire's mother, will share her journey and her family's journey, and then share the key points of the way out. So over to you again, Claire, Mum.
Thank you, Senator. So mature minor status is something that was mentioned in a Courier Mail article that we'll get to later. But this was my dear Claire's reconciliation with us after she realised that she had been tricked into estranging herself from us. So this was slipped under our bedroom door. You guys went to bed at 6:30, and this hit me at 8:30. So I thought you two would be well and truly asleep, and both of you are working tomorrow, so it wouldn't be cool to wake you. But I can't not say all this because I am genuinely sick with guilt and dizzy with panic. So I just wrote this note instead. Pardon my French, Mum. I'm so fucking sorry for being such a little shit in my late 15th year. I made you, Mum, cry yourself to sleep and get prescribed antidepressants because of my bullshit. Everything you, Dad, said then was true. Everything I said, I regretted. And everything I said will have an extremely permanent effect on you. And I'm so insanely sorry. I'm genuinely nauseous writing this. I just had a guilt attack while I was finishing up my crochet. Both of you are phenomenal parents, and I love you both so much. I'm so glad that this phase only lasted a few months. Even though I still did so much damage, and I'm so sorry, and I'm still working out my trans shit. And I just want the both of you to know that was probably the worst mistake of my entire life. And I'm so unbelievably sorry. The both of you are amazing, and I love you so much. I'm so glad I made that mistake with such reasonable and loving parents, because that would really have messed up my life otherwise. The two of you are perfect, amazing, beautiful, flawless people, and I just want everything to stay the way it is. And I love you so goddamn much. Please let this be as much of an eraser of my words as possible. I know so much of what I said is permanent and final, but everything I can take back, I do. I'm so sorry. Okay, so
How did you feel when you got that? When did you find it? That evening, the letter?
Yes, it was tucked under our door, and we don't sleep terribly well as a result of all this. So we all went out into the kitchen, and we got some water, and we sat down and we talked about it, and it was such a relief.
Is that both your daughters or just the youngest?
Oh,
You all went out to the kitchen.
The eldest dropped down, and my dear husband and I just sat down and talked Claire through this. So Claire is the younger child. My older child, I'll refer to as Dawn. Dawn was 16 years old in 2020, April 2020, when in the middle of a COVID lockdown, she was groomed online to believe she was born in the wrong body, and that the explanation for all her woes, all her sense of weirdness, all her anxiety and depression is because she was born in the wrong body. And
so she had lots of time, Claire's mum,
too much
on the internet because of the lockdowns.
Yes,
okay.
That is very true.
That's when it hit her. That's when they hit her.
And the missing element here is an algorithm. Once you start Googling a certain thing, an algorithm does the job it's supposed to do and brings you more content that it thinks that you will like. And so it opens a digital rabbit hole under the feet of my poor daughter, Dawn. So very quickly, she converted with an extraordinary religious zealousness. And she said she'd met people who were going to help her convert, and she didn't care what we thought. This was her leading an authentic life. She had to take testosterone in order to live an authentic life. And, yeah. So At 17, things were worse. She dropped out of high school, and we'll just mention that that was a Catholic school, just for the sake of it. And it
Catholic
was,
school. Wow.
yes, it was ironically the best thing that could have happened in hindsight, because it got her away from her affirming peers, and it got her away from the reinforcement of the trans radical activists who have infiltrated the counsellors' offices, school counsellors' offices, and school nurses' offices throughout Queensland.
Okay, let's Claire's mum, or Claire's and Dawn's mum, let's discuss the word affirming just for a moment, because many
Yes.
people may not be, they're certainly, they know the meaning of affirm, but in this sense, when children present as wanting
Transgender.
to
Yeah.
explore changing their gender, which they can't do. They can't change their gender.
No.
They can't change their sex, but
It's an identity
that's the
thing.
word. Yeah. Affirming is confirming. So in Victoria, this will shock some parents. In Victoria, if the parent does not confirm the child's view, the parent can be sent to jail, convicted of a crime and sent to jail. That's what's happening under Dan Andrews' legislation. So
And that is called
it's,
the Change of Suppression, Conversion Practices Prohibition Act 2021. Please Google it.
thank you. So what the parent must do is affirm or confirm the child's desire. And notice we're talking about children here. But that's not what an effective, loving, strong, responsible parent does.
Yes.
The parent will do what you've been doing. So continue. So that's what affirmation means.
That's what affirmation means. That means supporting your child apparently to go and sterilize themselves.
Not to ask questions, not to have a
Not
conversation,
to ask questions. No,
not
no,
to
no, no.
present
You're not allowed.
facts.
No, not allowed to do that. Goodness me, no. Rejoice, thou art saved. It's awful. So, my elder daughter Dawn, at 17, dropped out of school. Turned out to be the best thing possible, although it was, the end of the world at the time. At 18, she was in the grips of the worst mental health episode she's ever had. And we're talking, folks, we're not talking about like mad hysteria or schizophrenia or anything like that. We're just talking about bog standard depression. We're talking about anxiety. We're talking about autism. My whole family is on the spectrum, from, a little bit to a lot. I'm apparently neurodiverse myself. I have apparently a classic case of ADHD. And as a child, as a 16-year-old, if I had been hit with the same content, the same endless barrage of messaging that Dear Dawn and Dear Claire have been hit with, I would have believed it too. It is so expertly manipulating the mindset of the day. These feelings, these ordinary feelings of adolescence, that I'm weird and I don't fit in and there's something wrong with me, something inherently strange and wrong with me. Why? That's because, darling, you're trans. But luckily, we have a cure for that.
And jumping in there, Claire's mum, you mentioned the word spectrum. That's usually
Yes.
looked upon or used derogatorily, but it's actually true. We are all on the spectrum in terms of the way our mind works. There is
Yes.
a huge diverse range of the way people think, the way people our minds work. And I could be who knows where on the spectrum. You could be somewhere else on the spectrum, but there is a spectrum, and that shows the huge variation in the first place. Not everyone thinks the same way, uses the same method of thinking, and so we have to acknowledge that spectrum is not a negative. It's a huge positive.
It's
Because we get
massive
people who are attention deficit disorder who are wonderfully focused and bring
Yes.
so much.
Hyperfocus. It's a superpower.
But it's up to us. It's up to us to understand that and to love them for it and to make the
Yes.
most of it. So
And
continue.
not to exploit these feelings of difference, but to accept yourself as you are. So, my dear
And
Dawn,
also, adolescence. For many people, not everyone, but for most people, is a time of anxiety. We go through things when our body. Well, mine didn't grow that much, but most people who get to average height or normal height, they start becoming spindly and skinny,
Yeah.
and their bodies outgrow their clothes, their bodies outgrow their proportion, and they fill out later, especially males. Males
Yeah.
fill out later. And so it is a time of awkwardness, a time of self-consciousness, a time of anxiety about how we look, what we're going to be doing,
Yes.
am I loved, etc. All these things are just natural. Will girls
They
like
are.
me?
And certainly from the female adolescent perspective, it's the sudden attention going from boys are friends that will go bike riding down to the creek, and now suddenly it's like a gender apartheid. Boys over there, girls over there, and what the heck are these things on the front of me? I hate them. It's
You're talking about breasts.
yes, I am.
Yeah.
The sudden changes in the female body and the attention that they bring, sometimes awkward attention of young boys, is very alarming for many. So
Yep.
to just finish off on that point about neurodiversity, my dear daughters present in just a slight emotional maturation delay. I'd say that's the only imposition upon them. I think that's the only negative that their neurodiversity confers upon them. So going back to Dawn, at the age of 18, sorry, no, I should backtrack a little bit. She basically said she was going to kill herself unless I took her to a gender clinic. And I knew nothing about gender clinics at this time. I thought, oh, great, specialized medical help. Fantastic. Let's go. And then when I got there, it was red flag after red flag after red flag. I have a background in science, unsurprisingly, being a neurodiverse person. And
I'll jump in there. We've had a
yeah,
meeting before. I must apologise again, Dawn's mum, and Claire's mum, because I was rushed after arriving late here, so we haven't had much time to get together today. But I do know, and this Claire's mum came to me several months ago, and really impressed me with her clear, logical thinking and loving thinking. So continue. I just want to reassure people that that you're very, very capable.
thank you. And it's that clear logic that allowed me to see through the hysteria. I was asking things like, is gender dysphoria permanent? Do we have to consider it to be a permanent condition? Will it not just pass in time? Are there any other, well, it's a dreadful word, but comorbidities? What are the other conditions that present themselves alongside gender dysphoria? And the number one is neurodiversity, autism, attention deficit disorder, also physical ailments like anorexia nervosa, that body dysmorphia, that I hate my body sensation. And depression, anxiety, those just good old-fashioned, just got to deal with it, part of adolescence. And they do pass in time with love, with time, not testosterone. So I was asking questions about what are the long-term implications here? I mean, and also testosterone. Hang on a second. Isn't that like a class 3 restricted drug? Isn't that world famous for worsening mental health?
Yeah.
And there was a lot of bluster and there was no answers. And I was just being, unsurprisingly, the doctor got more and more hostile until she finally had enough of me and said, right, do you want a living son or a dead daughter?
Wow,
And,
that'd be heavily confronting.
and I
That
just said, right, that's it. And I left. And I dragged Dawn along with me. But
good on you.
Dawn had been slipped a card, and she was only a few months away from turning 18. And at her 18th birthday party, which was an utter disaster, she wanted to be reborn as her male persona on her 18th birthday. And it just didn't go terribly well. The next day, she went back to the gender clinic. And she came home and she baked me brownies. So I knew something was up. So something was afoot. I went into her room and I found a document called A Guide to Testosterone Therapy for Gender Transition. And it was a consent form, which was ridiculous. I went through it and, as having the background that I do in research, spotting biases, spotting associations that aren't there, drawing conclusions from very lax evidence, it's a nightmare. And the things that are not mentioned or just glossed over. Testosterone will give a young woman vaginal atrophy. Testosterone will make a young woman sterile. That's the rule, not the exception. Testosterone will make a young woman experiencing poor mental health aggressive. This is negligent for medical practitioners who have sworn a Hippocratic oath to do no harm, to redefine harm. They tell themselves that they're stopping kids from committing suicide, and no one can ever treat that lightly. But it's also used as a stick against parents. If you do not instantly affirm your child and put them on a one-way conveyor belt to sterilization, then you are responsible for their inevitable suicide. And this deeply unethical scare tactic is being used by gender clinics up and down the country.
And internationally, Claire's mum.
Internationally. So to just unpick that, there are two assertions and one lie. The first assertion is that gender dysphoria is deeply dangerous and permanent. No, it's not. It will pass with time. The second is that there's a massive, massive, massive surge of children presenting with gender dysphoria. And this is, according to trans radical activists, the natural result of improved visibility and acceptance of the community. No, it's not. It's peer contagion. It's like 16 years old is when you're most vulnerable to, I don't know, what was it for yourself, Malcolm? And for me, it was wearing one glove. That was just the fashion of the day. Elvis lives. That was another one. Everyone was absolutely convinced that Elvis was alive. UFO abductions. These are just things we genuinely believed at the age of 16. And there's a conspiracy man, that was preventing us from finding things out. Oh, how I laugh. So the lie is that if you do not affirm your child, they will commit suicide. And I unfortunately know of a family who didn't have the benefit of my very skeptical, logical nature and my background and my training to just spot that lie as exactly what it is, a deeply unethical scare tactic. And this chap, David...
it's inhuman, Claire's mum. It's actually inhuman to do that to someone.
And again, folks, all I want is safeguards. So, folks, David is a colleague of my husband's, and the two of them would commiserate about daughters. What are we going to do? What is this all about? Anyway, David he took Sarah to the gender clinic, and he was hit with this suicide myth, and he believed it, as any loving parent would. And he put Sarah on testosterone at the age of 17. Things went worse and worse and worse for Sarah. She moved out at 17, ran down to Melbourne. Things got worse and worse and worse. And then at the age of 22, after having had a double mastectomy, she realized that she'd been lied to. She realized she was never trans. She was never born in the wrong body. It was all hysteria, peer contagion, anxiety, and exploitation. And in a self-fulfilling prophecy, unfortunately, she did kill herself at the age of 22. So, my dears...
And excuse me, just for punctuating that point there and underlining it, when I've spoken in the Senate against this rubbish, I get the Greens getting very upset and saying that I will cause girls and boys to commit suicide. No. I will hopefully cause more parents to wake up and point out, I've tried to point out to the Greens that the reasons some young people commit suicide is because their life has been ruined because they've gone into a transition. Well, you can never have that transition, but they've changed certain things. They've taken puberty blockers, hormone treatment. They've had bits and pieces lopped off their bodies. And they're appalled with what's happened when they wake up because, as you point out, gender dysphoria is something that we all go through in adolescence. And imagine a young 16-year-old, 17-year-old, 18-year-old waking up one morning think, why did I cut off my breasts? Why did I have these treatments? And then what's their life going to look like? I mean, that would be really depressing and a severe threat hanging over people's livelihoods and lives, and then they would commit suicide. I can understand that.
Yes.
I can't condone it, but This nonsense is causing people to commit suicide. It's not preventing
Exactly.
suicide, it's causing people to commit suicide.
Exactly, Senator. And when I have questioned, the ABC are the greatest proponents of this suicide myth. Every time that they publish a story about trans rights or issues, they have to stick in the trans kids are extreme risk of suicide. And I have complained to them and said, what is your source? They came back to me with Western Australian Telethon survey. This was commissioned by an LGBT lobby group. There was another one done by Macquarie, again, commissioned by an LGBT lobby group. And they were asking children, and these are children who are self-identifying as trans anyway, have you ever thought about committing suicide? Folks, every teenager would answer yes to that question at one day in their lives. It proves nothing at all. And it's being used as justification to sterilize depressed, vulnerable, neurodiverse children and young adults. This is the stolen generation. Yeah, I said it.
Good.
It happened before and it's happening again. Childless, ideologically driven people in positions of power who are genuinely convinced that they are acting in the child's best interests are taking children from loving families. And that is strange.
And you know, and I know a lot of parents, mothers, particularly concerned about their daughters. Some have committed suicide after being on the wrong end of this process and having tried to change their gender with horrific consequences. Others who have come out of it okay because their daughters have, or their sons have
passed through.
Have come through adolescence and realised it was just a phase they went through, and they're perfectly happy being their birth gender or birth sex, and others still in the throes of it. So we've had all kinds of. I've had three people, thanks to Wendy Francis from the Australian Christian Lobby, bring mothers into my office and tell me their stories. Pauline Hanson has had similar with visits from parents. It's horrific what people are going through. Did you want to finish your story, and I'll ask you a few more questions?
Yes, certainly. So Dawn went back at the age of 18. There were no checks. It was a 30-minute consultation, and she was handed a consent form and a guide to start testosterone. This same child. Is that
at a hospital? Is that at a hospital?
That was at the, I can't actually say the name of it, but it's just it's a clinic in the Valley.
Okay.
This
State
same
government?
Child. No, private.
Private, okay.
This is a private one. So this same child, my darling Dawn, now at not quite 20, she is no longer identifying as trans. She would have sterilized herself at 18 years and 1 day if I had not put such firm and loving boundaries in place. Now, folks, there are a lot of people going through this. And if you are in the same situation, I have advice for you, practical advice for you. And I'll come back to that in just a moment. So I have two daughters, and my younger daughter, Claire, adores Dawn. They would run around the backyard in fairy wings and wands and chase each other. And now they're chasing each other to the door of a gender clinic, desperate to be sterilized because rainbow flag. It doesn't make any sense, but it doesn't have to because it's real and it is happening today. So my younger daughter at the age of 15 also said, I'm a man. I'm just like my older sister, Dawn. And she refers to Dawn as her brother. And I'm going to transition my gender, and there's nothing you can do about it, basically. My angel, Claire. Now, this all did sound a bit strange because she is a very logical, loving child. As you can hear from the letter that I wrote out, she is a very loving child. She's just very anxious and quite depressed, and she has ADHD.
Like a lot of teenagers,
a lot of young women. Yeah, and it's
anxious.
Yes, and she was groomed by the school counsellor to believe that if her
younger daughter went to a state school because
state school
of your experience with your older daughter in a Catholic school. So this is in a
right.
state school, right?
Yes. And the school counsellor has affirmed her, as in said, yes, of course you are, darling. Let's go to the school nurse. And the school nurse says, of course you are, darling. Here is a referral to a gender clinic at the age of 15. This was behind my back. My permission was not sought.
You had no knowledge?
No knowledge whatsoever. No advice.
Wouldn't that be the counsellor's first duty to call you?
No. Well,
shouldn't it be?
It should be. Now, folks, I contributed to a Courier Mail article where I talked about this exact thing, that people who are in positions of great authority and influence over very vulnerable children are affirming them, saying, yes, darling, of course you are a man. You have to be a man. If you say you are, then you are. And we've got a cure for you, and it's no problem. And the worst thing, you as a parent must affirm your child. You must agree to use their pronouns and their new name. You must put their feet on that conveyor belt to sterilization, and you are not permitted to have any other opinion. Now, it's worth noting that when I spoke to the principal.
So that's what the counsellor told you. That's what the counsellor told you.
Oh, no, this is what my daughter told me. I have heard nothing directly from the nurse. I've heard nothing directly from the counsellor. And when I brought it up with the principal had no idea.
The principal had no idea this was going on in her school or his school?
Her school, that's correct. No idea. And as I said to her, you are being held accountable for things that are being hidden from you. These are policies coming in from the Queensland Education Department. And now things are going to get a bit hairy, folks, because one thing I hate is being a woman and tearing down another woman. Grace, the education minister, has her own non-binary child.
She's the Minister for Education.
She's the Minister for Education.
In Queensland.
Is she enforcing her radical gender ideology on parents through her portfolio and the recruitment of trans radical activists into the education department? Now, there are a lot of teachers out there who can't do a damn thing because they're on contracts. They say anything, they're fired. But these permanently employed people come into the schools as wellness groups. I think of them as conversion squads, basically, and they target children who are not having a terribly good time of it. It's never the ones that are doing well that are vulnerable to this. And they recruit them, they convince them, they groom them, they tell them that unless your parents affirm you, your home is not safe. And what you can do is at the age of 16, you can declare yourself to be a mature minor. Now, this, ladies and gentlemen, is what's being used under Victoria's Change of Suppression Conversion Practices Prohibition Act 2021 to seize children from loving homes. Now, Toby Crockford, hello, if you're listening, the journalist from the Courier Mail who wrote this up. A department spokeswoman, I'm quoting, said guidance officers may refer students who require specialised support for a range of reasons to external services. That would be a gender clinic. Consent for students to receive ongoing support from a guidance officer must be obtained, the spokeswoman said. They never obtained my consent. The department provides comprehensive information to assist school staff, including guidance officers, in making decisions that ensure gender-diverse students receive appropriate support. While consent is often provided by parents, guidance officers use their professional judgment to determine if a student has sufficient maturity and understanding to be considered a mature minor and therefore consent to services. Now, folks...
The whole thing about adolescence is that adolescents are going through a huge transition emotionally, mentally, physically, socially.
In their identity.
Yeah, and they're not capable of doing this. Their minds are a fog. We know that. We know that for a fact, both males and females. They go through it, enter it at different ages, depending upon who the person is individually, and they emerge from it sometimes earlier or later than others. But this is not appropriate to be saying that adolescents are capable of making an informed choice.
This is a massive, massive overreach of the trust that we place in the education department. And folks, we are talking about school counselors. We're talking about school nurses, people who may or may not have a diploma. In their professional opinion, in their professional judgment, they're able to bestow the status of mature minor on a depressed, autistic, defenseless child and say, now you can go to Centrelink and you can just claim that your home is not safe because your parents are not affirming you. Now, folks...
So they're smashing families.
Absolutely, they are.
They're mutilating children and smashing families.
And that letter... Folks, even the most loving of child can be manipulated by this. The seeds of estrangement are so expertly sown, and they cannot get away from this messaging. It's online. It's in their faces. It's being taught to them at school as gospel truth. So, folks, here is what you must do. If you are in this situation, affirmation, a lot of people think it's like agreeing for the whole hog. It doesn't have to be. Once this broke, once we realized this was happening, my dear husband and I lawyered up because Claire was convinced by the school counselor to make a false allegation of abuse against my father, her father. And this is a script, folks. This is being peddled time and time and time again. Everybody has the same story. Declare that your father...
There are lies being told as well.
Absolutely. And this is how I managed to get through to Claire. I said, that's fraud. You know that's not true. You're applying to Centrelink on the basis of a fraudulent application, and we will defend that in a court of law if necessary. That's when she backed down. So, folks out there, write up your situation, write up the help that you have got for your children, write up any... My kids are very imaginative and anxious, and panic attack is what she's had previously, and she's a darling. She really is. But she's just misled. And so she's being told by people who are vulnerable. She's being told by her school counselor, the person she should be able to trust, declare yourself a mature minor. And that is the removal of the only safeguard on gender transition in the state of Queensland, parental consent under the age of 18, which I didn't give for my oldest daughter. But the second she turns 18, you can do as you like. It doesn't matter whether you're neurodiverse, whether you're 3/4 insane. It doesn't matter. Sure, honey, here's your testosterone. There are no safeguards. None. Zero. Squat. And we need safeguards because, folks, I'm actually not that morally opposed to gender transition. If you are 30 years old and you've lived a life and that's what you want to do, you go, sunshine. Seriously, that's none of my business. I have no skin in that game. I've got no grounds for moral outrage. That's you as a mature person deciding what is best for you. But we're talking about children, and not just children. We're talking about autistic, depressed, vulnerable children subject to peer contagion. And it is the stolen generation. It is the deliberate estrangement, inciting teenagers to estrange themselves from parents. So, folks, enough doom and gloom. What can you do? This is what you can do. It's going to hurt. But you do have to affirm them. Only affirm them as far as using their name. Pronouns is just such a... It's impossible. You know, that's in there.
So if Dawn took a male name, you would call her by that male name just to show her some respect for her choice.
Yes.
But that's it.
That's it. That was the,
so you're not
the deal that I
affirming
struck
the whole
with both
thing.
the
You're affirming her name.
Exactly. And so that was the deal that I struck with both the kids. You enjoy full parental support whilst you live at home with us. Whilst you live at home with us, we will affirm you in terms of using your name. We will respect you, and we will seek the help that we think you need for your other concerns, your depression, your anxiety, your neurodiversity. And in exchange, there will be no chemical or surgical transition until you leave this household, ideally until the age of 25. And what do you know? My now not quite 20-year-old daughter is identifying as non-binary, not trans at all. This is the same kid who was desperate to sterilize herself at the age of 18 in one day. And bless her, Dawn has been instrumental in keeping Claire in the family. She was the one who turned around and said, look, you're really going too far with this. Mum and Dad are not the ogres that you're making them out to be. I want to stick around. I want to reconstruct my education. I want to go to uni. And she is, folks. She's just finished the first trimester at university. She's picked up her life, and I'm so proud of that young lady. And she can do as she likes, really. She's 19 years old. Get out there, sunshine. Have fun. Have that fun that COVID stole from you.
Well, COVID didn't steal a damn thing, Claire's mum. COVID didn't steal a thing. The government stole it by telling lies and deceiving people about COVID's impact. That was
and creating a pressure
deceitful.
cooker.
Yes.
A pressure cooker for lies and influence. And folks, this is real. This is desperately, desperately sad. And Grace, if this reaches your ears, you have a non-binary child. Are you enforcing your radical gender theory beliefs through your portfolio as Education Minister upon the parents of Queensland? Are you contributing to the estrangement of children from their families, loving children experiencing anxiety, depression, neurodiversity, things that they will get through? Are you seeding the state education department with trans radical activists? Are you putting these people in positions of power and giving them policies saying, identify children who are identifying as trans, tell them that there is this path to freedom that is declaring yourself a mature minor at the age of 16. All you need is an allegation of abuse. It will never be investigated. It's all good. Are you doing this?
You know, I guess that more questions are you aware, Grace, this is going on in state government schools?
Yes.
Are you condoning it? If you're not aware, why the hell aren't you aware?
Why doesn't
If you are aware, why are you condoning it? Why are you encouraging this rubbish? Why are you smashing families and destroying children's lives? They're the questions we need to put to her.
And these are the questions that she will have to answer to, folks, because this is just as the stolen generation before it. This is a group of ideologically motivated, childless people, like the nuns before them, who are sitting in judgment on parents and deeming them unfit and taking their children away on no grounds at all, no justification, just a massive overreach of the trust that we bestowed in them. And so, folks, if you have a child who is going through this, my advice is this: remove them from school. Absolutely, 100% remove them from school, because that is the environment that is causing the problem. There are ways back in afterward, and that works so well for Dawn. After taking a year out, getting her mind straight, realizing the world wasn't exactly how she thought it was, and that her parents are not the horrible ogres that we'd been painted as, that we're actually pretty decent people. Once she realized that, she went back into high school, well, into a finishing school kind of thing. She got herself her NATA, and she got herself into university. You go, sunshine. So if your child is stomping on home and is, in danger of this zeitgeist, this phenomenon, remove them from school.
Well, that's wonderful. Do you have any more solutions? Because normally I get to the solutions at the end. We're 3/4 of the way through the hour, so I guess that's appropriate. Why not tell all your solutions, what you've learned right now?
Definitely.
Claire's mum.
Okay. So, folks,
Go for it.
There are several things. And, one of the things I tortured myself about as a mother, oh, my goodness, phones, social media, I haven't controlled this enough. Well, let's keep in mind that I didn't give my kids phones until they were 13, and boy, did they bitch and moan about that. The omnipresence of social media in their lives is not something that you personally, as a parent, have the power to influence. Elon Musk himself, tech billionaire, has lost a child to the trans narrative. And if a tech billionaire can't keep his own children safe from the influences of the social media that he just bought, then no one can. Absolve yourself of that immediately. And the only thing you do have control over is the phone itself. Have device-free time. Get outside. Sunshine. This is a vampire. It feeds on our children's essences, and sunlight kills it. It is a vampire.
And it has no conscience. It has no conscience.
No conscience whatsoever. Get your kids outside, spend time together. The thing that really worked with Dawn was Thursday nights we would go out and see a movie, and we would just pull it apart over a pizza. And it was really, really helpful to just reestablish that mother-daughter connection. With my younger daughter, Claire, I've taken her bird watching. She's really into birds as much as I am. So on a Sunday morning, once a month or so, we go on out to some Brisbane wetlands and we look for warblers and we just enjoy the peace. So spend time with your kids. It's not exactly rocket science, that one. And you will have to affirm your children's name. And I know that hurts. It sucks. You spent such a lot of time working through what am I going to call this child? But apparently it is a widespread cultural phenomenon in Australia. Everybody hates their name. So it's an easy thing to target somebody on. I hate my name. Everybody does. So
I don't.
Well done, Malcolm, but you've got a good Scottish name. So
I'm a little off background though.
Oh gosh. So folks, affirm their identity, the fact that they are currently identifying as male. Be their ally. Make it clear that you are not the horrible ogre who is preventing them access to this promised cure. You have concerns, and these concerns are about time. Challenge.
Excuse me, Claire's mum. Excuse me. That'll be a hard thing for some people to swallow, to affirm your girl's choice of a male name. Yes, but I suppose what you're really doing is you're saying, look, I respect you. You're allowed to do that. You're under 18. I will let you do that. But you're living in my house. You will not take hormone puberty blockers. You will not take hormone treatments. You will not mutilate your body. That's the conditions under which I will condone. That's the deal we have. So you're showing them respect. You're making it very, very clear you disagree with their name, but you're willing to call them that because they've requested it. So you're showing them enormous respect. You're also showing them strength by saying, but you will not have any of these treatments because you are a child until you're 18.
That's true. And folks,
that's loving respect.
Thank you. And folks, if you do take that token step of affirmation, it removes the grounds on which your child would be taken from you by the state. You're not affirming your child. And this is, again, going back to Victoria's Suppression of Conversion Act, which is, folks, the intent of that act is quite noble. You're not gay, son. You just need more church. That's what it's intended to be about. But what it's being misused as is beating parents with a stick, saying you must affirm your child or I'm taking that kid away from you. So if you, and this is what I put in my statement of events that I lodge with my solicitor, that we affirm both of the girls. We use their names. We respect their journeys, and we are providing them with psychological support, access to a psychologist, access to medications that will help them. We love them, and we will support them. And this allegation of abuse was seeded by the guidance counsellor. It's not true. And when we sat down with Claire and Dawn and we read this through, reality started to hit at that point, and exactly what it was that Claire had done. That was when she had, well, it took a few months to really process, but that was when she put that letter under our door and just said, I'm so sorry.
So she's a bright girl, obviously, because she worked out that she's being used.
Yes.
But
children, they're not stupid, they're vulnerable.
Yeah. So what some of the words I picked out here. Love, number one.
Oh, yeah.
You demonstrated love for your children. You know, we all know of stories. We've all experienced them if we're parents of a 3-year-old testing us out, or a 2-year-old, or even a 4-year-old testing us out. They do that because they want to make sure that they have got boundaries. They don't want to have
Yep.
a parent that has got no boundaries for them, because they feel more secure with boundaries, loving boundaries, very, what do you call it? Justifiable boundaries, sensible boundaries,
Yes.
protective boundaries. So that's all encompassed within love. You know, Maria Montessori formed the Montessori education philosophy, a wonderful, wonderful philosophy. But unfortunately, a lot of people, and especially those coming from conventional backgrounds, think it's all about love and light. Rubbish. It's about love and orderliness, because
Yes.
children like the orderliness. But the orderliness is not beaten into them, not stomped all over them. The orderliness is developed and led in them, and
Yes.
they're given responsibility. So that love. The second thing I've picked up and want to use with you, I know Australians don't like being complimented, but I'm going to compliment you, Claire's mum.
Oh, thank you.
Respect. You had a relationship with your children despite this groomer, despite your kids' anxiety. Um, you were very firm and strong, not abusive, not disrespectful, but you're very firm and strong in laying out boundaries. You recognize anxiety in adolescence, and you recognize it's a time for love, but you also recognize that it's a time for strength on the parents, and that's what children want. And you also recognize that with these inhuman practices that are going on in our schools, it's a time for lawyers, time for support, and it's a time
And
for being
inquiries.
together.
Yes.
Yes, inquiry. Thank you. That's a really important word for adolescents, because they're inquiring about the world, inquiring about themselves, inquiring about their perception of the world, and so they need to inquire they need to inquire to form their own boundaries later on in life. And you're not
Yes.
forcing something down their throat. You're saying you're giving them good advice and support, and you're there. So that's helping them to inquire about the world.
Yes. And folks, there is an old scam, like a really, really, really old scam. Let's you and her fight. And that is the scam that's being used here, pitting parents against children, mother against
Yeah.
daughter. And it's important to spot that for what it is, and to just try and stand side by side with your child, as opposed to confrontationally face to face. Let's you and her fight is a divisive strategy used by cult recruiters and all sorts. It's blaming parents for everything that's gone wrong in the child's life. I mean, oh my goodness, I'm white and I'm middle class and it sucks. And also feeling guilty about that. Our kids need time, not testosterone, and they need time to learn to love themselves as much as we, their parents, love them.
I love that saying. Our kids need time, not testosterone. You gave me a copy of the Courier Mail article, which I held up. And thank you so much to the author of the Courier Mail article, Toby Crockford. And thank you so much to the Weekend Australian for a wonderful article I read on the weekend in the Inquirer section. It's written by... This account was written in 2021 by an Australian mother who remains anonymous to protect her family. It is an edited extract from the upcoming book, Parents with Inconvenient Truths About Trans, Tales from the Home Front in the Fight to Save Our Kids, edited by Josie A. and Dina S., and will be published by Pitstone Publishing, Durham, North Carolina, the United States, on August the 14th. It's a wonderful article. Let me see if I can hold it up. In the Weekend Australian, and the article is called, this is very clumsy, I know, but it's better than not doing it.
Transgender crisis.
No, it's called,
Home truth.
can you read that?
One. Back a little bit, please.
Home Truths of a Transgender Crisis.
All right.
So that's the Weekend Australian. Can I also get your thoughts on this, please, Claire's mum? Norway bans child sex changes, joins Finland, Sweden and UK in rejecting gender ideology.
There you go.
Look at that. Now, which paper, where did I see that? I don't think I've got the source for it. But I saw that just yesterday.
Well, folks, this is another one of. I know if I'm triggering anybody or bringing up some very bad memories, I do most sincerely apologize. But I often think of the parallel to the abuses of children by the church, of the children who were entrusted to their care. And the greatest problem was the silence around the issue. Everybody who had that happen to them thought it was only them. And I think even the abusers themselves had no idea of the extraordinary extent, the conveyor belt of abuse that was constructed and protected. So, folks, speak out. Probably the most valid, the most heart-wrenching thing. Well, there's been a lot of heart-wrenching things, but my dear mother-in-law, I'm actually quite lucky in that I love my mother-in-law. She's great. And she's a teacher of 40 years, recently retired. And so she was dimly aware of what is going on in education circles about teachers who are being forced to affirm kids and, sit there while some squad comes in and says there's 57 genders and pandemic boy and whatever the heck. That they have to sit there and just cope because they don't have the grounds. They're all on contracts. They don't have the grounds to object. Anyway, my dear mother-in-law, mother of 5 children.
We've only got a couple of minutes, Dawn's mum.
Okay. This is probably a good point to finish on. I told her what was going on because of the allegation against her son from her granddaughter. And I said, well, trying to make light of it, you must know all about this. You raised 5 kids. She held me gently by the chin. She looked at me in the eyes and she said, I have never had to deal with what you have to deal with. This is absolutely unprecedented. We must act. We need safeguards. We need Grace to answer these questions about whether she is enforcing her own ideology on Queensland parents through her portfolio.
Well, you're a Queenslander. So why don't, before you leave next time you visit our office, why don't you help me pen a letter to Grace, because you're a constituent of mine. So I will write a letter to the State Education Minister. In the notes, Dawn's mum, that you gave me beside the Courier Mail article, you said, fight back, write to your State Education Minister and Shadow Minister to demand an inquiry. Well said. And you've also said, not affirming is not abuse. Not affirming is absolutely the right thing to do, the responsible, loving, caring thing to do.
But if you must, then please do, because don't be the bad guy.
Right.
Sorry.
And the bad guy is someone who lets their children prevail, lets their children become victims of this cult.
Yes.
Just a couple of words under that beautiful picture of a lovely young girl under that Norway bans child sex changes, joins Finland, Sweden, and UK in rejecting gender ideology. That one there. There's that beautiful child.
Lovely girl.
But the headline is just amazing. And look at it underneath. Common sense and science are gradually prevailing. So that's quite often what happens. As parents, we're vulnerable when our children are involved. We become very emotional sometimes, but they're the most important thing to us, and we have to stand up for them. They're only minors, so we have to stand up for them. It's our duty to protect them, and in this case, protect them against the state. Against the state. So we've only got a minute left. I want to thank you so much, Claire's mum and Dawn's mum, for what you've done with your children, for what you are doing today in being on the Malcolm Roberts show. And I want to thank you so much as a fellow human and a Queenslander, as part of the Queensland community. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. And thank you, Senator, for being the champion of unpopular causes.
We're just doing our job. So until our next show, this is Senator Malcolm Roberts, staunchly pro-human, pro-child, proud of who we are as humans, and a believer in the inherent goodness and care in human beings. I want to acknowledge the pain of being a human sometimes, and then take a minute to appreciate the abundance and potential in and around all of us. Please remember to listen to and to love one another. Thank you so much, Dawn's mum, Claire's mum. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next week, in 2 weeks' time.